Hi, Janet. Well, it's lovely to have you on. And how have you been today?
Really good. And it's such a joy. Having just met you, you immediately resonated with me, and I'm delighted to be here with you for this.
Oh, thank you so much. I
Yeah.
resonated with you as well, and I'm sure everyone here on the audience will as well. Um, I just want to briefly introduce you as well to the audience for those of you who may not know Janet or may not know Janet as well as many, many others do. So Janet has made tremendous changes in many people's lives as the CEO of InviteCHANGE. She is the CEO of a coaching and human development organization that shapes the world where people love their life's work. She's a visionary leader in the global professional coaching industry, as well as an ICF Master Certified Coach, accredited educator, and has engaged adults, teams, and global enterprises for nearly 30 years to invite change that sustains well-being and excellence. So we will also maybe talk a little bit about your book later on if we have a little bit of time. So let's start with that. So Janet, one of the things that I really have loved about your work, apart from all the incredible depth that you bring to this concept of organizational change and development, since that's specifically what we're talking about here, is your methodology and concept of generative wholeness. So, could you start by giving us a brief introduction on what it is?
For sure. And a little bit of kind of where it came from,
Yeah.
and a little bit of a bias I have that you and I have had many chuckles over, which is I really don't much like models. And for the longest time, resisted creating one or documenting one or saying that something I was doing fit a model.
Yeah.
So I decided that uh, about the 100th time I got the question, why does what you do work, from leaders and teams, I realized that I needed to come up with an answer. And it needed to be an answer that wasn't something I manufactured, but that really came out of the body of work I was doing with leaders and teams inside of companies. And so I started really examining what's the development that's occurring. What are natural capacities? Some people would call that personality, but I'm not talking about the motivational factor of it, but more the deployment, the application of one's personality, character, whatever you want to think about. And I realized that it too fell into a bit of a quadrated system. I would see people, for example, who were really good at getting a practical idea and getting it to market, super fast at getting it to market,
Mhm.
but they didn't always hit the mark. And so they would have, 5 failures for every 4 wins, and wonder why. And I knew the piece that was missing was slowing down to be reflective and to be a learner. Could they do more experimenting and piloting and put some rigor around learning what success looks like? And would that improve the probability of more production of results that they wanted? And therefore more efficiency, more productivity in their creativity. And that worked. I could see that pattern everywhere. The other one was a little trickier. I think if we look at the top 10 things CEOs worry about, for at least the 40 years that I've been in the marketplace, creativity and innovation has always been on that list, which always makes me kind of curious. It's like, we've spent a lot of money trying to figure this out, and it's still a problem. And I realized that what we were really talking about is the self trust necessary to let a new idea bubble up, right? Loosen our grip a little bit on our history and experience, be willing to, throw spaghetti at the wall and see which string sticks and go, oh, that's a new idea. So the capacity, the innate capacity to be creative is in every single human being. So there had to be something in the way. And what I started to see was that things like psychological safety, forums that allowed people to ideate without people evaluating the ideas until they bubbled up enough. In other words, to originate new thinking, this was one of the other elements that was missing. Now, I didn't stay there, because originating new thinking and being a learner, there are lots of people who would raise their hand and say, but I do that. Yeah. And now let's look at how you do at making them practical, those ideas. And let's look at how you do in producing results. So, I'm in some ways, I suppose I'm a bit of a human engineer. And I was looking for, do we have all the elements sorted that make for a fully competent, confident, empowered leader inside of all kinds of different industries? And ultimately, the answer I came to was yes. And then I had to figure out what the heck I was going to call it. So, and I realized that I was really talking about generating human development. And then I went to the dictionary and I found generative, and I went, all four of these verbs that I'm playing around with are in the word generative. So
Yeah.
that's the beginning of that. And that the flow of change, which is inherent in all human development, involves all four of those capacities. And I still wasn't done yet, because I couldn't explain yet why these were common, no matter who the person was. And that took me back to a different set of roots, which really was to understand, how do people choose to invite change in their lives? I named the company that on purpose because I've never had trouble with change. You've probably seen other interviews of me where people have talked to me about, I say to them, I'm fearless. And they say, impossible. Nobody's fearless. But the truth is, I am. I love ambiguity and uncertainty. I realize not everybody does. So what is it that has people be courageous and overcome what keeps them in the status quo and following somebody else's model, instead of deeply trusting their own intuition and curiosity to see what wants to happen? Well, that's what we would call the authentic self. And when people hit a certain staging in their lives, and it's not tied to age, it's actually experience and conditions and situations they find themselves in, and they start to realize, hang on a second, that's somebody else's rule book, it's not mine. There's a reflective process that begins, that claims essential traits that make us us. So, so if I could originate, create, learn, and produce from my authentic self, I would be unique. And that would give me an opportunity to make a valuable contribution and not worry too much about whether somebody else was the same or different from me. And then maybe I could actually see other people that way. Oh, that means I could live a sovereign life, and I could become self-ruling in the way that I relate to the conditions of my life, meaning I have the responsibility and the power of choice about whatever condition I find myself in. How will I show up and interact and make decisions? So generative wholeness is the state of being when we stand solidly into our authentic self, freely expressing personally and professionally from that. That's the sovereign state. And you add on top of that the capacities of being generative. Now you have someone who can sustain excellence no matter where they go. And all of this has come out of my work with leaders and teams over the last, I counted it, I think it's now 29 years that I've been doing this work. And how they described what it was that they developed.
Just incredible. Thank you so much for going through the step-by-step process of how you got to generative wholeness and the meaning behind it. As I listen to it, as an Agile coach myself, and as my audience is Agile centric, it really strikes me as something that is so similar to the principles and values of Agile in so many ways. I know that's a very broad statement, but if we really look at what Agile represents and what Agile is working towards in an organization and in each individual and in each team, because it goes from each team member to the entire organization, generative wholeness is truly the core of business agility, if I may say so. I know that's not well known, but wow, if we could really stress the importance of generative wholeness and what you have discovered through all of your years of experience working with teams and organizations, and bring that in to
Yeah.
organizations, to agile development programs and coaching programs. I mean, we would make a tremendous difference in this field, because one of the things that you and I have talked about, and I have mentioned in other places on the podcast, is that one of our weaknesses in agile, and I'm sure it's the same in organizational development, et cetera, is the focus on models, which you spoke
Yeah.
about very briefly.
Yeah.
So yeah.
And it's like a shortcut. I mean, I understand why models are so appreciated. So it gives us a shorthand to talk to each other, and they're usually they've come with a graphic that makes it easy to translate it.
Mm.
But the problem is, I think what it does, it also does what we do with horses when they're racing, right? We put these little cups on either side so they can't see the horses next to them. Don't lose your focus. Boom, just go straight. Well, the world is always changing. So if I have these blocking my vision so that I can focus, I might implement something that no longer fits the situation because I'm not taking in the whole view of what's actually happening. And I think this is what models do. It blinds us to seeing all the data and being comfortable with saying model is scaffolding. I'm gonna be agile on the inside of the model so that I make sure that I'm taking in all of the relevant data and sensory experience of what's occurring, and take the risk to say, I wonder if we entered here, what would change? And that's that spirit of learning. And this is what I think we get rid of when we apply models too rigorously.
Wonderful. Going back to your point about sovereignty, I really loved you using that in terms of the generative wholeness and how that allows that individual sovereignty. So, one of the concepts, as you know, in Agile is the concept of servant leadership. And I have seen that, to me, agility is not simply about servant leadership being displayed by agile coaches, by leadership in the traditional sense, but by everyone in the team. Each
Yes.
individual is a servant leader. Yes.
Mhm.
So could you speak a little bit more about that sovereignty that you get from generative wholeness might actually support one in taking on servant leadership roles, whatever, role they're actually in that organization?
Yeah. Yeah. I think this is a really incredible insight that you have here because much like the model discussion, but now we're really talking about what do we expect of associates, employees, colleagues inside the workplace? What do we expect of the way that they are relating to each other? And we don't spend a great deal of time here. Of course, values get written. Some values also have a behavioral statement that go with them. We have leadership principles. We have competency models. And all of those are attempting to describe what we think the behaviors are that will have the organization thrive. Unfortunately, they often operate like a blanket you're wearing around. And we miss the step of who am I when I'm behaving in a way that's congruent with those values and principles. And the who am I goes back to how do I know who I am, authentic self. And until I've done that work, I don't know how to make decisions that are respectful of me, respectful of you, and respectful of the work we're doing together. So in a lot of ways, organizations have moved very quickly to skill building and the fundamentals to be a good supervisor, to be a good manager. They then go into leadership. Not as many organizations have understood the value of helping people know who they are. And when they skip over that, usually what happens is that somebody figures out that that's good development for them when they get data that tells them they're not behaving in a way that makes them collaborative or easy to team with. So we hear it from the what not to do rather than what to do. So from my point of view, the work that we do in our coaching and learning programs to strengthen one's understanding of how am I being self-ruling, it means to turn the auto pilot off and be more deliberate, purposeful, we might say conscious, rather than operating out of habit and preference and assumption and biases, which our bodies neurobiologically love. And we must pause and say, what serves in this moment? And I use that word on purpose because we are a servant to our own lives. That's what it means to have a power of choice. Now, I can go along blissfully believing that I'm, in the perfect team, in the perfect department, in the perfect division, in the perfect company, in the perfect country in the world. And then I'm now operating on autopilot and it doesn't work. I don't know why it doesn't work because I'm operating out of my habit and preference instead of operating deliberately. So the act of choosing to slow down a little bit and be a little more thoughtful, that's developmental. No matter what stage of career you're in. C-suite executives all the time say, I'm too far from the front line. I don't understand what's going on. You need to give me a dashboard. I know a lot of agile coaches that spend a lot of time cranking through data in order to tell a story. Why do they need to tell a story? Because the executive is not trusting that the workforce itself has developed in a way that they can make good decisions. They don't actually know if these people have the capability or are exercising the capability, probably more important, to handle complex problems. They know they're not handling them very well because they can't see everything. Right? Now, that's conditional for them. It's not that they don't have the experience and the wisdom and the horsepower to make decisions in a complex world. The challenge for them is they don't have enough access to data. And the ones who have access to the data haven't been given the development opportunity to self-trust, that they can reason their way through, and that they have the resourcefulness to do that. That's all developmental. So this is the reason why coaching is so empowering until coaching stops being about the individual strengthening their own choice making, and we start to migrate into what might be called mentoring and consulting and training, which isn't empowering. It's a necessary, but it's insufficient for someone to operate in a sovereign way.
Very well said. Thank you. Yeah, I appreciate that input. And I wonder how people can take steps in organizations that maybe don't have full support of leadership to really take on a coaching approach within smaller teams where they don't have the bigger umbrella supporting them, but the smaller teams might be able to go forward with changes that support them. Have you seen successful transformations in that regard before?
So there's a couple that come to mind. I'm thinking of a manufacturing organization that does a really good job with Agile. They have a pretty robust Six Sigma process in place in the floor, production floor, and they have employee involvement teams. And one of them, the coach is relaying this story to me. One of them seemed to be coming along just fine. Their mood and attitude and frame of reference when they were coming together for their weekly meetings was going quite positive. They seemed to have an optimistic outlook. The team's results was doing well on the floor. So the coach decided one day to say, I think it's time for me to move on. And they said, oh, no, no, you can't move on because when you're here, we're different than when you're not here. And in that moment, the coach said, how come? What's different when I'm here than when I'm not here? And the team started to examine, we don't manage our relationships. We don't invest energy to ensure that we're following the behaviors we've agreed are the best way for us to be teaming. And so the coach said, so you leave it to me to intervene when it breaks down and you're able to see it and you're okay with me intervening. And so you go back to your healthy behaviors. And they said, yeah, exactly. So that means you're productive for 1 hour every other week when I'm in here, but what about the rest of the time? Oh. And so this team began to construct so they had a set of teaming agreements at the time that were about 10 or 11. It was too many. They couldn't remember it. And so they had a very robust discussion over 3 weeks where they were able to get it down to the things that they would do individually, the things they would call each other forth to celebrate when they saw each other having interactions that were using those behaviors. And they agreed that when something was occurring that wasn't one of those behaviors and it was getting in the way, that everybody had permission to call a quick huddle. And they would have a conversation about it and figure out how to fix it, and fix it they did. They did ultimately retire their coach because they'd accepted the responsibility for how they were relating to the conditions that they found themselves in, day out on the floor. Now, here's what happened in that particular organization is that as the employee involvement teams all started to adopt a more generative mindset and use teaming behaviors, they started producing different results. And guess what? Somebody noticed. And guess what they got? More money, more staff, more projects, more opportunities. So sometimes it can feel like decision makers aren't paying attention. On the other hand, have you given them something to pay attention to? And so teams have the power of choice every single day to break the habit by being more deliberate and be the ones who make the choices about how do we get better. I care about getting better. That's my shared purpose as part of being this team.
That's so powerful. And I think we are often conditioned, through corporate structures of hierarchy to give our power away to leadership. And that's such a wonderful example of bringing that power back to the individual team, which is really the heart of Agile. So thank you for sharing that example. Yeah.
You're welcome.
So I'm curious how the concepts of generative wholeness and generative culture actually help break down the silos and encourage cross-functional collaboration, because this is really a core concept in business agility, and I'd really love to hear your perspective on it from a generative wholeness perspective.
I know it's too many syllables. That's the one flaw in it.
It's good.
um, so well, I think definition of terms is helpful, and I'm curious if you would share a little bit about how do you think about collaborative, and if you saw it happening, what would be the behaviors that would tell you a team is being collaborative?
So for me, collaboration, specifically in an agile sense, would be collaboration across silos. So where we have teams that are focused on delivering value rather than separate departments that are just put into place for one function. So we're looking at maybe cross collaborative teams that cross different departments to come together to deliver value for a customer or for a product. And the collaboration comes from the fact that they're working together on specific goals and specific products rather than just being focused on functions. And I'm missing the word, but when you're working on, yeah, I'm missing the word. So I'm just going to leave it there. Does that answer your question?
It does to some degree, but let me build on where you've gone there.
Yeah.
So much of organizational life today is matrixed,
Yeah.
where you're working with people, your team has responsibility and authority associated with it, which is the formula for accountability. You have responsibility and the authority to produce some outcome, and it is not part of your what your direct superior pays attention to. So you immediately create a bit of an internal conflict. Where's my allegiance? Is it to the things that are going to make sure that I have job security and bonus? Or will it be to this assignment that I have on this matrix team because I have a unique piece of the puzzle that is essential to deliver value in the example that you've given? That internal conflict is one of the things that goes invisible and doesn't get managed. Unfortunately, it shows up in the form of conflict that arises in the matrix team or the multidisciplinary team, whoever it is that has come together to deliver value. And so a coach gets called in to help them kind of break through that conflict. And what do they look at? They look at the team's processes. They might look a little bit at the team's relationships, but rarely do I find are they paying enough attention to what's the source of the conflict in the first place. We try to fix symptoms rather than examining how did this team get constructed? What's the measure of success that each person is paying attention to when they make decisions about how to contribute? And where might there be moments or places of non-coherence or incongruence between how they see their reward for job security and their participation on this team? And yes, to a certain degree, we're talking about reward systems of acknowledgement and, getting a good attaboy. And yes, we are talking a little bit about compensation, but it's actually more important than that. It's the intrinsic reward of being competent, given autonomy to act, and then feeling loyalty. And if I've got a split loyalty going on, that I'm only on this team 5 hours out of the week, and the other 35 hours of the week, I'm up here paying attention to what the boss is asking me, my team's going to suffer. My matrix relationship's going to suffer. You've seen it. The hours and hours and hours that are spent at the next level up, and sometimes the next level after that, resolving feuds. Whose resource is this? Last time I checked, we didn't cut human beings up into pieces and parts. And what I'm describing to you is the piece we're missing. We never ask the people when we get them on the team if it's okay. Well, never's a little too much generalization. It's often overlooked in the favor of aggressive work. Busyness wins out, effort wins out over thoughtfulness in the construction of the team. So that's one element of it, and making sure that we make visible the invisible barriers to feeling great about being on the team. I think the other thing is we don't define team very well. And so collaboration ends up being a solo. You're a collaborator or you're not. Right? There's not much in the middle that helps people find here's what I'm available to contribute. Here's my style of working. So the construction of a team is a design task. And there's a lot of research in design thinking that demonstrates that when we use more of an engineering mind to think about what are the sets of experience and skills and styles and approaches that best serves what's the shared purpose of the team. Because we do want them to operate in synergy. But if I don't feel that my competence is respected, as evidenced by the fact that I'm not given autonomy to act, meaning I have authority to fulfill my responsibility, I will not feel loyalty. And the first minute I have this internal conflict between my direct reporting line and this project, the project loses. And I don't care what you do in terms of process change, it's not going to make any difference. So collaboration is an inside job inside of each person, and it must become transparent for the team to come together and say, okay, got it. I see where the potential conflicts are. Let's take that into account when we're doing work planning to ensure that we're not asking you to do more than is reasonable with the competition you have. Now, I'm just giving you one example. Multiply that by the 7, 8, 9, 10 more people, sometimes across multiple time zones. We don't do a very good job of workforce planning and estimating about what it takes to actually work in that matrix environment. And if we wanted to get more productivity in organizations, we'd stop managing conflict and instead look at how do we eliminate it arising in the first place, unless it's by design because we're trying to break the status quo.
Wonderful. Thank you. I love that so much. It's amazing how much everything that you say is so aligned with Agile that I really hope that your messages get out into the Agile world, because you have so much to offer, an already amazing system. to add so much more breadth and depth to it in ways that aren't necessarily fully added on at this point. So I'm really excited you're on this podcast, and I really hope that you will continually grace the agile world with your thoughts as well in terms of agile teams.
Well, thank you. I
Yeah.
would love to do that. That would be great because, at the end of the day, I want everybody to love their life's work. And I think that the work of creating business agility is about creating a less toxic workplace. And I'd probably say it even more optimistic than that, creating a workplace where people recognize and are recognized by the choices we make about how we deploy our gifts. And I think sometimes we can get a little overwhelmed with the tactics and we miss our humanity. And that's really what I think you're talking about, which is how do we sustain connection to our humanity while we're also figuring out how to be more efficient and have the right choices the first time, dedicated to quality.
Yes. In fact, one of the core values of Agile is individuals and interactions over processes and tools. And yet, just like every other methodology, we get caught up in those processes and tools. But we think it's okay because it's called an agile process. So it somehow makes it fine.
Well,
Um,
it's easy, right? I mean, it's the same thing with models. The tool is tangible, process steps can be diagrammed and shared, and everybody says, oh, yeah, got it. Only I don't got it because I haven't figured out whether I'm going to be okay if I change the way that I'm doing things. And we are creatures of habit, as I said, biologically. So it takes some willpower and some awareness and some commitment to want to break those habits. The body will help us, but we have to tell it. We need to tell ourselves this part of the back of our brainstem called the reticular activating system. And it's going to operate for efficiency first, unless you say, that's not producing a satisfying result for me anymore. I'm going to change this.
Wonderful. Yeah. I see a potential collaboration of you making a real difference to the agile world. And
That would
um,
be fun.
yeah. So speaking of that, I think we will end with one question before I'm going to ask you to tell us more about your book and everything in that. And the last question is, what advice do you have for leaders and individuals who are interested in incorporating generative wholeness into their organizations or their teams?
What advice? That's a terrible thing to ask a coach. We don't give advice. So I'm going to give you some questions.
Okay, great.
I think that there's two very underdeveloped capacities in humans today in modern life, particularly for those who are digital natives and are very, very comfortable in the rapid pace of information consumption, is stopping the consumption and allowing for there to be room for reflection, which means to reflect. In other words, something has occurred. What happened for me as that was occurring? What was the influence and impact of that experience I just had? Even the word experience is difficult today. We don't have a lot of vocabulary. 40 years ago, Daniel Goleman wrote about emotional intelligence, and we were building emotional vocabulary. Well, I think we need somebody to write a book about experience vocabulary because it's sensory. You've been in a room when a team wasn't getting along. Well, what's the phrase we use? You can cut the air with a knife, right? Because it's so thick and heavy. This is the work. So unless I'm taking the time, instead of just going to the water cooler and saying, can you believe that guy was such a jerk? If we don't break that habit and instead take some time of quiet to reflect on what just happened, how was I part cause or agent? What might have been going on for that person who was being kind of cranky in the meeting? I wonder if it was something outside. Now we have curiosity starting to surface. And the relationship can hold that rupture because it's not personal. We're looking for what is the root cause of somebody's behavior that's not normal. It's not the way this person always is. And I firmly do not believe that people get up every day trying to go make somebody unhappy. We're not wired that way as humans. We're wired for social connection and belonging. So what is it that I will examine to give permission for space to not do information consumption, and in its place be reflecting to say, what did I experience? How did I generate that experience? What did I allow others to influence me to choose that created an experience that isn't quite as satisfying as I want? That's the reflection skill. The second is mindset. And our mindset is the current time version of everything that came before, which we would often call worldview. If you took a selfie of your mindset right now, what would it tell you? And what are we talking about? Frame of reference. So if I came from a part of the organization that is often at odds with someone else on the team in another part of the organization, like put sales and operations across from each other in the same agile team, oy. Right? And there's lots of methods to help them build empathy and understanding about what it's like to be in another's land. That's all good work. But then the question is, how did I get that frame of reference? And how purposeful am I before I walk into a meeting to check my attitude at the door? What's informing my attitude? It's my values. It's also my beliefs. It's my thoughts. It's my habits. It's my routine actions. Okay, if you want to shift your mindset, that's the underdeveloped capacity. All of those things need to be eligible for transformation or evolution, at least, because it influences how we show up, how we interact, and how we make decisions. Those are all three pretty important things. That's what mindset is. And so the ability to have mindset shift is directly correlated to slowing down and asking the question, what's mine to do here? Steward to self, steward to the process, steward to colleagues, and therefore to the organization.
Incredible. Thank you so much, Wisdom. And I know very well that we have only touched maybe the tip of the iceberg right now on everything that you can offer people. So could you let us know and let the audience know a little bit more about where we can find more of your work, how people can get in touch with you, and how they can continue learning from you?
Yeah, of course. And there's all kinds of free ways to do that. It's not just about hiring me, which would be lovely. Yes, I coach individuals and teams and organizational leadership around developing this capacities. InviteCHANGE.com. I named the company that way on purpose because of what I said earlier. I'm fearless, but I realize lots aren't. When we accept responsibility for the authority we have as human beings to be a choice, that's when we start inviting the change that creates the life satisfaction we want. So we have all kinds of learning programs and coaching programs to strengthen one's understanding of the authentic self and to live a sovereign life personally and professionally. Janet.Harvey@InviteChange.com, super easy. First name dot last name. That's true for everybody on the team. We're on LinkedIn, Facebook, and Instagram. Just put in Invite Change. Those will all come up, and connect with me there. It would be great. You'll learn about free things that we do, like the Vanguard Conversation series. How do you learn to be comfortable sitting in discomfort because a thorny problem just doesn't seem to go away? This is what we'll be exploring all year.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Thank you. And I will also put the links down below as well for everything. So another thing was your book as well. Could you tell us a little bit more about your book?
So the genesis of the book, I have to give my team a lot of credit here. In 2020, well, actually in 2019, we decided that in 2020 we would have a conference dedicated to social progress. And what my vision was to bring practitioners who are working in the human development field into the same space with people who were working on social progress and get supported by funders, philanthropy, and foundations and such, to understand the power of working with a human development practitioner to facilitate solving big, complex social problems. So we were looking at racial injustice, we were looking at human trafficking, we were looking at climate change, and ultimately, and healthy communities was the fourth one. They got to, oh, I don't know, March or April, shortly after the pandemic was upon all of us. And the team said, you know, it would be really good if we had the book. I said, what book? And they said, the one you're going to write about how to invite change. I said, seriously, it's April and you want that for the September conference? I told them they were nuts, but they're tenacious like me. So next thing I know, I have an outline that I've been given for the 10 chapters of the book, and they've cleared my schedule, and I wrote. And we got an editor, and I wrote, and the editor sent me back stuff, and I rewrote and I wrote and I rewrote, and 4 months later the book was in production. We didn't quite make it for conference, but it got released in December of 2020, and I started on July 20th.
Wow, that's incredible. What a
Yeah,
story.
it was.
Yeah, such an inspiration too. Oh my God, I love it.
It's a fun, it's chock full of ideas and skills and techniques. There's an audio book, of course, ebook version and paperback and hardback, all of the above, whatever anybody wants. It's filled with some techniques and questions to help. So somebody said I should have put a byline on it about, a leader's guide to self-coaching, because it's kind of written that way. Lots of storytelling of clients that have worked with over the years and how they have invited change in their organizations and in their lives.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Janet, it has been such a pleasure having you on here, and I'm glad you were able to share your wisdom with us as well. So just a reminder, I will share all the links for your book and your social media, your website, etc. below. So everyone, please go check out Janet. Janet is just a wealth of information and has such important ideas for agile organizations as well as non-agile organizations. So thank you so much. And I look forward to seeing you again soon at some point. And yeah, thank you so much. Thanks again.
You're very welcome. It was an honor.
Thank
Take
you.
care, Hannah.